Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at KRC. Welcome to today's webinar where Keith Richards is going to take us through his new and updated 10 Golden Rules for Successful Agile Projects. The slides from today's webinar will be available from our website, so go to AgileKRC.com, click on the Resources tab and then click on Free Downloads. While you're in the Resources section of the website, you might want to check out the Webinars page where you can access some of our webinar archive and also sign up for next month's webinar, which will take place on July 18th. You can also find all of our webinars on our YouTube channel, so just search for AgileKRC. I'm shortly going to pass you over to Keith, but just a couple of things before I do. If you want to tweet about our webinar, please use the hashtag 10GoldenRules. If you'd like to hear more from Keith about this subject and much more, you can check out his blog at agilekrc.com/blog. Incidentally, any questions that Keith doesn't get time to take at the end of the webinar, he does type all the questions and answers up, and we do post these on his blog, so check that out. I'd like to point out a couple of the features of the control panel just in case this is your first time. So if you look at the top right hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow. Click on this to maximize or minimize your control panel, and if you'd like to ask a question, just type your question into the question box and Keith will take as many as he can at the end. So one of the new functions of this software is that we can now see Keith's webcam. You have control of how big or small you want to make Keith's face. So just click and drag the double lines till you're happy with how this looks. I'm afraid you won't be able to see Keith if you're watching the recording. You can only see Keith's webcam if you're watching this live. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards.
Thank you very much, Claire. And welcome everybody to another webinar. We're getting tremendous feedback, and this is our most well attended webinar so far. We've had a bit of fun with some previous ones, as you might be aware, and we get a lot of feedback that you guys find that really funny when bits of the scenery fall down. Not so funny for us here, but thanks very much for some of the comments we've had. We do value the feedback, it's very important, so email Claire with anything, any suggestions in any shape, manner or form. I just want to start with the results of the question that you answered when you actually signed up for the webinar. It was really about how are you getting on with your Agile, and the interesting point about this is about 19% of the people attending the webinar today aren't actually doing it, so that's quite interesting. So to find that 1 in 5 people listening are on the nursery slopes looking at it just goes to show that even though this word's been around since 2001, people are still looking at it and moving towards it. But it is now mainstream, so everybody needs to now have a position on it. In terms of very well, an equal figure. It's about 20% we're doing very well, so that's really great news to know that 1 in 5 people are getting on with Agile really well. And at the end of these 10 golden rules, I'd be very interested to get your view on what your 10 golden rules are, or certainly 1 or 2, because that's going to help me. And part of the webinar and the whole webinar series is very much about sharing information. In terms of those that are having some problems, that was 13.5%, and in terms of those that class themselves as average was 46%. So the middle score there, the bulk, half of the people, average. We're doing some bits well and we're doing some bits not so well. Just some quick name checks. People seem to like us when we mention where people are listening from. I quite like special names, actually. We got our friend from Wagga Wagga's back, so I'm pleased about that. Someone from North Quincy in the US, I quite like the sound of that place. And we've got everybody from the Philippines, San Francisco, New Zealand, South Africa. I think it's the first time we've had someone from Bangladesh, so welcome to those people in Bangladesh. And we've also got some people in sunny Manchester. Just one quick thing, some of this webinar will be held in Dutch, but I'll explain that when we get to that, because I know we've got quite a few people from Holland listening, so you can tell us how we get on with my Dutch when we get to that point. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get going on the webinar and get to these 10 golden rules and work out what they are and how they can actually help you. So, in terms of where we're going with the presentation structure, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what I call the methodology, the way that these 10 rules were created, and I explain, as I said, the origins of that. We then go through the 10 golden rules and explain what they are, and we're going to do those in reverse order, so try and make it a bit more exciting. Something will go wrong at some point in the webinar, because that's what's happened on the last two, so we're planning for that. So if it does go wrong, that's all scheduled. And at the end, which will be around about sort of 1:05 if you're listening on UK time, that's in about 30 minutes, we'll start taking your questions and answers. So get those questions and answers ready. Okay? So without any further ado, just a quick intro slide as to who I am and who KRC is. We're at the forefront of Agile thinking, and we've been that way for about 15, 20 years. We cover everything to do with Agile. So if we can help at all, get in touch with Claire at the end of this webinar. Got a lot of experience of working with PRINCE2, working with Scrum standalone, and written a book on it, and been very fortunate to get an award, which I was quite pleased about. So the reason for that summary is so that you can see where I'm coming from, and I should know what I'm talking about. But again, I'm very much into other opinions and counter arguments. So feel free to give us that sort of feedback. So what is the methodology then? Well, there's no science behind it. There's no voting, forensic analysis of going through various things. It's quite simply my view. It's what I've seen over a long time doing Agile. It's just an opinion, so I can't say it's a fact, but it very much is my opinion. I've not come up with the ideas in 5 minutes. This is the work of lots of years of trying. Now, it's very important that your view might be different, and that's what I'm saying. I'm very interested to get your view, your feedback, and an alternative angle. I sort of, to be honest, thrive from it. If someone's come up with a better idea than mine, I'll just adopt it straight away. There's a lovely sort of quote there, and I don't know if anyone knows that, who actually said that one, but if everybody looked the same, we get tired of looking at each other. And I think that's a really good way of explaining that if we all have the same view and we don't listen to each other, we've got a bit of a problem. Now, if anybody is into sort of great philosophers and knows who actually said that line, just pop it in the chat box to Claire, and I'll tell you who said it at the end of the webinar. So, without any further ado, let's go through the 10 rules and work out what they all are, and they're going to be in reverse order. So the first thing is rule number 10, and quite simply this is, it might sound a weird thing to say, but if what you're dealing with is complicated, treat it as complicated, okay? Now, the reason I'm saying that, there's a lot of Agile that is really quite simple, and it's built for simple things. It's built for 7 people in a room, 1 product, and we've just got some modifications and improvements to the product, and we've got a product owner right with us, and it's all very, very simple. But life's not like that, and what I'm finding with my customers, I'm saying that I would suggest 85, 90% of things aren't like that. Some companies, product development companies, yeah, you could get that situation. But you've got to be very clear about where we're going with Agile, because most of Agile that you read on the internet, the training, particularly the use of Scrum, only addresses BAU, and by BAU I mean business as usual. So if you've got a project or a big change over 2 years, or you're changing some sort of platform or something, this is not regular fries, and you have to be very sort of clear, and you need to do things differently. Just a quick analogy here, if you want to make a sandwich, you can go to the fridge, you can get some bread and look what's in the fridge and make a sandwich. It's really, really pretty simple. But if you're making a 3-course lunch or a Christmas lunch or a Thanksgiving meal, you're going to have to plan, you're going to have to organize yourself, and it's not straightforward. And the same goes with the Agile things you do, and the same goes with the Agile way of working. Now, specifically in the Agile space, there's something called epics, and this user story concept, writing requirements on user stories, I think it's brilliant, I think it works really well, but when you've got a big piece of work and it's complicated, don't just call it an epic and write it on an index card or in Jira or whatever and then think you're sorted. Really, these big pieces of work need to be handled differently. They're projects. They need to be started up correctly. They need project management. So, as I say, sort out when you're working with anything, what's complicated and what's not complicated. Because despite what a lot of people are saying, and very interested in SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework that's getting some publicity, and there's a really good body of knowledge there. But the concept of a project, it doesn't quite seem to sort of gel there, as it's more with flow. It doesn't mean to say SAFe is wrong or you can't integrate it, projects with SAFe. Quite the opposite. You can, but it's not very visible. It's not very obvious. And for all the project managers out there listening, the good news is that, in my opinion, project managers are here to stay for the rest of eternity, and certainly in the Agile space. And there's a big movement and a lot of things been written about we don't need project managers anymore, but if it's complicated, somebody's got to put it all together. So this is why I'm saying rule number 10, the first rule is if something's complicated, treat it as complicated. Don't just stick it on a post-it note and think, you know, hey ho, here we go. Now, number 9, rule number 9 is another important thing, and again, this is what I see in my travels, and it's about what I call self-organising. One of the biggest things about self-organising is the, I don't know, it almost gives an image that it's a fantastic thing, it's a beautiful thing, and everywhere in Agile it talks about self-organising, self-organising, self-organising. But you've got to be careful here, because there's a lot of upsides to self-organising. Personally, I think self-organising is great. Another word for it might be empowerment, but you know, it is the best way of working. The people down there at the coalface, they know what they're doing. They can get from A to B. In fact, when I say they get from A to B, they're the best people at knowing how to get from A to B. But you've got to be a bit careful here, because a lot of people see this as self-direction, and a team of people, well, we're going to go where we want to go, and we're empowered and such like. But self-direction is very, very different, and I see this with a lot of teams that, you know, we're using Scrum, we're self-organising, and we're really not that accountable to anybody. As long as the product owner says X, then we can do it, and you know, off we go. There's also concepts that I'm not particularly happy with, only because I see it fail so often, and I see it fail 9 or 99 times out of 100, is this idea of sort of collective leadership, the sort of the team taking the praise and taking the blame together, and I just don't see it working. That's why concepts like servant leader you've got to be very careful with. I think the idea of servant leader, some of the thinking behind it, I think is really solid and really good. But the problem is when sort of servant leader turns into no one's accountable, and it's you know, we all stand together and we're all collectively to blame for the problem. I don't see it works. I don't see it happens. Now, be clear here, I'm not saying servant leadership is bad. I think facilitative leadership is excellent, and I think it is, in my opinion, the best way of leading a team. And a team to self-organise, brilliant. But this idea of we're going to go where we want to go, and you know, because we're empowered, it doesn't quite work that way in the real world. So be very careful for the sort of the happy-clappy stuff. Make sure that the lunatics don't sort of take over the asylum, because if you do it right and you get the self-organising inside a clear boundary, so if you're using something like PRINCE2 and you've got a clear work package with very clear boundaries and guidance, then I think it works a treat. Just remember, those at the coalface usually know what's best in terms of how to get from A to B, but they're not an island. In the last 3 months, I can think of 3 places I'm working at the moment where there's a sort of a little bit of IT independence party, and it's you know, one example I can think of is where perhaps the Scrum training has been a little bit too, for want of a better word, theoretical or puritanical, and there's a tremendous feeling here that the project manager is just surplus to requirements. Well, they might be if it's easy, but not if it's complicated. So understand what self-organising is, because it's really good, but don't let it go beyond, you know, beyond its boundary. Right, number 8, and again, reverse order. So principle number 8, in terms of rule number 8, is about getting the appropriate level of ownership for your Agile. So you know, this Agile journey that you're on, I've got a couple of questions coming up for you. So have a little think about this. And my first question for you is, this Agile journey, which might be a small thing, a few ideas, or a massive change, do you know who actually owns it and runs it at your organisation? You know, can you go to Dave or Mary or whoever, and because they're in charge of the Agile transition or the Agile transformation, or whatever it's being called. If you do happen to know who it is, that's good, and if you don't, that's a problem. But also, this person who is running it, do they have enough time for it? Is it an edge of desk activity, or are they giving it 3 or 4 days a week, or perhaps there's a team of 2 or 3 people? You know, where are we with this? Because it's very important to get the appropriate ownership, and by that I mean the right person and the right amount to actually get the job done. It won't do itself. It won't do it as, oh, we'll spend 2 hours a week, or we've got a little team of people that meet once a fortnight. That's not going to get your Agile to work, okay? Where do you go when you've got an idea? So if you hear something new, something you've read somewhere, or something that you picked up on this webinar, where do you go to? Who do you go to try and make this happen? Because a lot of things happen in what I call a viral way. People just move it around the organization, and you know, it's not the best way to get it out there, because mutations and variants can sometimes occur. So I don't know what it is, but the last, I don't know, 12 months, the PMO keeps getting mentioned so often. So Project Management Office, you could call it Portfolio Program, PPPMO, P3O, whatever, but the sort of support function. Again, another customer recently, the PMO didn't know where they fitted into an Agile transition. And they seemed really surprised when I said, you're right in the middle of it, because you're the sort of guardians of the process. So why isn't a lot of stuff coming through you? Because it should be. And you know, they seemed quite surprised, albeit pleasantly. But the PMO isn't a walk-on part or a side issue. That should be the centre of excellence as to where things are actually happening. How high up does the support go at your organisation? You know, does it go all the way to the top? You know, sometimes that's a bit easier when you've got a small organisation, but if you're in a big organisation, you know, who's supporting this? You know, how high up does it go in terms of your you know, the desire from your organisation to go Agile? Now, rule number 7, and I'm going to just go through this slide, and then we'll have a go at a poll, which should be quite exciting. And rule number 7, in terms of these golden rules, is measure it, as long as you know what it is. Now I'm going to break into fluent Dutch now. There's a lovely saying called meten is weten. Now I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it is Dutch for to measure is to know. And I came across this expression, you know, many moons ago, and I really, really like it. And it's almost saying measurement is knowledge. If you're not measuring something, if you're not counting something, if you're not, you know, and again, it could be time, money, features delivered, defects, anything. If you're not measuring something, you know, you can't control it. So measuring is really, really important, and counting things, and in terms of where you're going with your Agile. But there's a game of 2 halves here. There's a very known sort of expression in soccer called a game of 2 halves. It seems to be a game of diving a bit more nowadays, soccer. But a game of 2 halves regarding this measuring is, firstly, what you know, what are you measuring, and the second point is really looking at the actuals that come through. So if you're trying, if I'll be very simplistic, to improve sales by 10%, you know, that's a measure and a target, if you like, success criteria. The secret then is to measure whether you did get a 10% increase in sales, which is what I call the actuals. So these 2 things, this sort of the success criteria and the actuals, are so important in terms of where you're going. Whatever you're doing, going on holiday, running a time box, prototyping a screen, designing a new product, I always start by saying, what does success look like? Even a workshop or a meeting, how do I know I've succeeded? What does it look like? Am I holding a piece of paper with a design on it? What does success look like? And if you start at that end point, and then you can work to it, I find this really quite a powerful way of going about things. So if you sort of don't measure things, or you can't, bottom line is you're in big trouble. If you can't, you know, measure or identify when you got there, or identify if you're going to get there. And remember, I'm not just talking about time here. I'm talking about anything. You know, customer satisfaction. If you can't measure it, you know, you're in trouble. So as I say, second most important thing there, it's the, if you like, the other side of the coin, is this idea of actuals. So how long did it take? And certainly from my experience, I would suggest 85% of the people I deal with do planning, do estimation, and they don't really have time to capture those actuals. Now this isn't a small point. If you can capture those actuals, you suddenly become predictable, and you suddenly get to know a little bit more about what you're doing. I went to a conference the other day and somebody used a fantastic quote. I absolutely loved it. It's from Deming. I don't know how many people know some of these sort of people who helped a lot with Japanese car manufacture. But there's a lovely saying there, in God we trust, all others must bring data. And that's what I'm saying. There's feelings, opinions, but just look at the numbers in terms of measuring it. Right, now the most exciting part of my day is going to happen because I'm going to run a poll. And those regulars know that normally what happens is something melts down, but we're going to be agile and we'll see how it goes. So here we go with your first poll today. And the question I've got really is about your transition to Agile. And it could be a small thing or a big thing, or you're looking at a few things. You know, you're obviously on the webinar trying to learn something about Agile, you're using Agile. So my question for you is quite simply, how do you know, in fact, my actually it's up on the screen there, thankfully. So really, your transition to Agile, do you know what success is going to look like? Very simple question. Maybe a year from now or 2 years from now. Do you know what success will look like? Now we've got about 60% have voted so far. Right. Well, let's call it quits there, and this is where I'm going to close the poll, and hopefully nothing goes wrong. So, and it has. I need to try and get my screen back. Hang on. Just wait, everybody. It won't be long. I'm nearly there. Right, sorry about that, but as regulars will know, there's a special feature built into GoToWebinar that means you can't actually share things pretty easily. So I'm now going to share the poll, and hopefully you should be seeing what the results are. Now, I think they're really interesting. So remember, the question is, do you know what success will look like? And 1 in 5 have said yes. That is really impressive, and that's really quite a high figure. I'm quite surprised if it's that high, but that's really, really good. Now remember, if you meet somebody senior at your company and they go, how's your Agile going? These people aren't looking for an answer that goes something along the lines of, yes, going good, they're loving it. They want to know some numbers. They want to know that defects are lower. They want to know that return on investment is coming through quicker. They want to know sort of 8 projects are running instead of 7. They want really hard figures. But to those people who are in the I think so and not sure, which makes up 3/4 of the attendees, you need to go and find out what this Agile thing is all about. What are you trying to achieve? There is no point trying to improve quality, yet all we're doing is reducing costs. So this is where you've got to be very, very careful, and this is why this area is so, so important. Okay? Now, again, I'm going to try and hide the poll, and I'm assuming everybody's okay. So we've done that slide there, okay? And now I have to break out again. So now we're going to look at rule number 6 in terms of where we're going with the golden rules of Agile. And this is all about playing with scope and making sure scope is center stage. Again, some of the regulars on the webinar will realize or be familiar with how much we talk about scope at KRC. But really, this is the thing that it's not what I call an option, it is center stage. It's exactly what you should be working with. Start to get into either flow or time boxing and concentrate on it's the features and the requirements that we deliver, and these are the things we actively manage. It's the safest place to go for contingency. That's why it's the thing to put center stage. If you're thinking of extending the deadline, in this day and age, that can be quite dangerous. Compromising quality, nobody should be doing that on a project. And throwing money at a problem can happen sometimes, but generally it's not a good use of time. It's not that productive throwing 2 extra testers at a problem to speed it up. So one of the best things to do when you get some funnies on a project, as I say, is play with the scope. So prioritizing with Moscow, things that must be there, should be there, could be there. and also very importantly won't be there this time, gives you that ability to move around your features and hit the deadline and protect quality. The devil's in the detail, and this is where you'll get a lot of your room for maneuver. We never need it all. That's the key thing. No matter what anybody says, occasionally it's true, but it's so occasional. It's really due to other reasons, like sort of historical or even baggage reasons. But the devil's in the detail, and that's where we can trade and swap things around. Think about your washing machines. How many programs do you use on a washing machine? Most people use about 1 or 2. I have heard some experts that get above 3, but you know, I'm not so sure. I think they should get out a little bit more. But the bottom line is that it's the safest thing to play with. That's why I'm saying focus on the scope. But don't see it as all negative about what we lose, what we drop out. It's very important to realize it goes both ways. When somebody comes up with a new idea, we can bring it in, and this is what a KRC we call trading. So if you bring something in, you can drop something out of a less of a priority. So it's not all about losing things, and a well-run project will only lose a small amount. In terms of rule number 5, what we're doing with rule number 5, and this was in the original 10 Golden Rules, is about creating what I call a rich communication environment. Whenever we go into organisations, not so much now because it's more about time, but certainly, hey, we have communication problems, and basically been one of the main sources of problems. And the important thing to do with your communication is create a blend of how you communicate. Different ways of communicating sort of move different sorts of information around. So there's email, there's face-to-face, there's workshops, there's video chat, there's modeling, there's lots and lots of different things, and you've got to use the right channel at the right time. One thing I do, a quick tip for everybody, is I do find people don't model or draw that very much, and I find that a picture's worth 1,000 words, and if you've got a problem, get up by a whiteboard, start drawing things, and the problem becomes a lot easier to define. Have you got things on the wall? That sounds another simplistic idea, and some organisations won't allow it. But actually, some of the big thinking that's coming out of areas like Kanban and lean systems is very much about visualization of progress. And to be honest, I think it's almost beyond what's the word? It's beyond debate, really. It's just if it's on the wall and visible and low tech, it's got more chance of getting the info around. So have a look around your room. Have you got things on the wall? Facilitation is something that I find really useful. The ability to talk with teams. I was dealing with a team recently where the language they used was really good. They were saying things like, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, I think I'm wrong. No, I like your idea. That sounds good. But other teams, you know, it's all a question of I want to win the argument. And this is where, you know, facilitation and being facilitative as a core competence, I think is big. And I think we've gone into this on a few other webinars, but don't underestimate the damage email can do. It's so unpersonal, and you know, it can make people's blood boil. You've got to be very careful with email. It's appalling at trying to get across opinions and views, and particularly emotions. Right, let's have a look now at rule number 4. Now, rule number 4 is very, very important, and it's all about wearing sensible shoes, okay? Now, I know a girl once who saw some fantastic shoes. She really, really liked them, but they were actually the wrong size. They were a size too small. But she thought, well, I'm not really bothered about that. They look fantastic, so I think I'm going to wear them, and off we go. And, of course, within about an hour and a half, she's in complete agony and, you know, sort of rookie error. Now, the same goes with your projects. There's some bits about Agile that are really fantastic and lovely and brilliant, and I was listening to someone this week, in fact, talking about a multi-million pound, I'm talking tens of millions of pounds on a project, and they decided to go for it Agile, which meant no requirements. Now, that's just not sensible. Okay. Now, it might be boring to write requirements and come up with things like a business case that stacks up and to write the requirements well, but trust me, it might be really boring, but it's, you know, it's rule number 4 for a reason, because it's so useful and so powerful. What about stuff downstream? What about your operations people? How are you going to cut it over to live? What's your testing strategy? All of those sort of things need to be thought up before you rush in and get going. So I'm just trying to say, be a bit boring, be a bit traditional, you know, and do things sensibly. There's a common thing I see with most companies where they've had to start because, if we take an IT example, the programmers are ready. So this lovely idea about they're in trouble on the project. Well, you haven't got that right and you haven't got that right yet, so how come you've started? Well, they're all sitting around doing nothing. Now, this isn't clever. Again, this is like wearing a pair of shoes that's just one size too small. Back in the 70s and 80s, a fantastic writer on what's actually the forerunner to Agile, called Steve McConnell, wrote this fantastic line, go slow early to go fast later on. Now by that I don't mean let's get into analysis paralysis, I just mean just be sensible and as I'm saying, wear sensible shoes. So as I say, rule number 4, wear sensible shoes. Right, let's have a look now at rule number 3. Now, the final 3 rules did, for me, stand up head and shoulders above all the others. They just seem to be the 3 big ones, and I spent quite a bit of time working out, to me, which of these 3 should be top and you know, if you like, gold, silver, and bronze. And rule number 3, so 2 to go after this. Rule number 3 is this idea around inspect and adapt becoming a mantra. Again, some of the more old-fashioned, bog standard ways of working, plan, do, check, act, plan, do, review, and every variation on that you've heard of. Really simple stuff, but it's really, really powerful in terms of trying to improve how you work. And the key thing with inspect and adapt is to do it all the time and look for small things. Don't try and make a big change because it's very hard to digest that in an organization. So take your time, have a look around. Any time you see a problem, don't immediately go into defense mode or search for the innocent or work out, hey, it was the developers, we're in the clear. Any time you get a problem of any sort, work out what it is and try and get to the root cause of it. Because the more you can iron out these defects at the beginning, the more you can, as I say, evolve your process little by little. If you look on the screen now, there's a couple of Formula 1 cars there from the Red Bull team, and Formula 1 is a very good example of continuous minor improvements to try and save, you know, hundredths of a second, even thousandths, because they amplify up and they spend ages just looking at any sort of defect and trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, it was a pretty spectacular Grand Prix, those that are into it, last weekend, and I can assure you Mercedes will be looking at what happened and they will be making sure it never happens again. But the only reason that it can solve it is to work as a team, to change the process, to work out how they can get it to work properly. There's no point getting into a blame game because people will get a lot more defensive. So make sure you can change your process. And there's a lovely concept coming out now in Agile that's quite powerful, and this idea of what is called shortening the feedback loops. Anytime you do anything and you wait for some testing and it takes 5 days to come back, you know, that's not a good feedback loop. And anything you do, try and get feedback on it as quickly as possible, as quickly as you can. At the end of these webinars, we have an exit poll, so we get feedback instantly on what people thought of the webinar. And the biggest feedback loop you can shorten of all, which if you into anything and you've read anything around Lean Startup, is this to the customer. From the moment you have an idea, you build something, the customer uses it and feeds back to you. How short is that feedback loop? And it's these companies that are shortening that. So for example, an app on an iPhone, for example, you can get incredibly short levels of feedback. But look at your process, look at your organization. If you make a change, how quickly can you get some feedback on that change? And the sort of nirvana, the ultimate, is to try and get it real time. To give you a quick example, you have, in say Scrum, for example, you have a retrospective, which is looking at your process every couple of weeks, maybe every 4 weeks. Could you get this to be almost daily? And I don't mean having daily retrospectives, but the ability to spot something and the ability to change the thing that was causing the error. But if you just spend all your time going inspect and adapt, it didn't work, change it, what works. This is how you can get better and better. And I do find this is one of the most powerful things out there although I don't think, particularly to the newcomers here, those people, the 20% that haven't done it before, it might take you a while for the penny to drop on that one, but it is a big area. So we've got 2 to go, and that'll take us up to around about 10 past to take some of your questions. And the number 2 is actually, sounds pretty obvious, and I apologise if it is obvious, but in Agile, you have to get this in place. You've got to collaborate. It's a team game. I remember once seeing Bravo 2-0 with Sean Bean was in that film, and they were hiding in a trench, and they didn't want to get spotted because they were behind enemy lines, and they didn't want to get spotted. And a small shepherd boy was looking after his goat, like you do, and the goat stumbled across the soldiers hiding in a ditch, and sure enough, they were spotted. And as soon as they were spotted, Sean Bean, who was playing Andy McNabb, just said, options. Now, he didn't start panicking or blaming people. He just said, right, options, what do we do? And I think in a team, that really sums up what you need to do. Everywhere you go with Agile, it's about collaboration and teamwork and making sure that we play as a whole unit and not as an individual and not as individual roles. When you get into individual roles and silos, it really does cause havoc with Agile. Not so much with Waterfall, but certainly havoc with Agile. This is why the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if I'm running a team or I'm looking at teams, it's getting that team to gel, respect each other. Like the team I mentioned earlier in the webinar, they have the right language for each other. And I don't believe you can invest too much time in this. You can spend money on tooling, you can spend money on training, anything, but getting your team to work as a unit is really important. So have a look at your team and see whether, you've got energizers, the people who are getting things going and getting the team gel and yes, can, those sort of words, or whether they're the doom merchants and what I call the energy sappers. This is a line from Clive Woodward, who won the Rugby World Cup with England a few years back, and he actually went into his squad and identified the energizers, the energy sappers, and removed the energy sappers. And before he did that, they didn't win a World Cup, and after he did it, they did. And one quick thing about email, again, is whether you've got any email automatons, because these aren't conducive to what I would say is, as I say, a highly collaborative way of working. And the final rule is quite simply, and it was the final rule last time and it still is the case, be on time every time. And this is your greatest weapon, but it's a brutal weapon in Agile. Agile is very much about time boxing, and if you're not time boxing, you'll be using flow, which is very much time-based, but it's not the sort of serial way of working that you might be used to with Waterfall. And the great thing about being on time and time boxing and hitting deadlines is you can make all the excuses you like, you can run, but you can't hide. There will be a moment of truth. So you either hit the deadline, and if you've done a pretty good job, well done. And if you've done a fairly good job, okay, what can we learn? But if you failed, take your medicine and learn. Why is it we couldn't do 2 weeks work in 2 weeks? Why did we miss that deadline? Bear in mind, if you're Agile, you've got a lot of room for maneuver with the scope and features if you're prioritizing correctly. So, we should hit the deadline. We should have loaded a plan with enough room for maneuver. Therefore, why did we fail? Try and find out the moment of truth. So failure is good for you, okay? Just want to clarify that very, very minor detail perhaps, but failure is good if you were going to fail. So when I say failure is good, fast failure is good if you were going to fail. It's not good if you're going to succeed. But as I say, fast failure is one of the best things you can have. And the reason is we're in a different age now. I don't know if you know what that symbol on the screen there is. Normally about 1 in about 50 know what it is, and it's the icon for Snapchat, which most people have never heard of, but the actual industry, or that actual company, is worth $5 billion. And we're moving in a different time zone now. People want things quick, on time, speed to market, short feedback loops, and the only way you're going to get that and control that is to make sure you keep hitting deadlines by varying the scope. Remember, we don't need it all, despite what people say. We don't need it all, and if they say you need it all, Agile becomes limited. You start to move back to the old way of working and, if you like, older sort of values. Right, I'm now going to hand you back to Claire.
Hi Keith, thanks for that. Right, just a quick one then. I've got the date of our next webinar there, July 18th. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what it's going to be on. We haven't decided yet. So if you keep checking with the website, there's the webinars page there in the resources section. Otherwise, just keep an eye on your email. We'll send you a couple of email invites in the run-up to the next webinar. Quick point as well, if anybody is in the London area or south of England, Keith and I are going to be at the APMG International Showcase in London on the 3rd of July. Keith's doing several things on that day. He's going to be running a masterclass with one of our customers, Mars, where they'll be sharing their experience of introducing Agile and the sort of holistic view that they took of introducing Agile, so that will be very interesting. He'll also be doing some roundtable discussions. I know he's doing one on estimation. Can't really remember what the other one is. Maybe Keith can tell you. And I'll be manning the stand. It's a free event to come along to, and it will be a really good day, so do come and say hello then. Public courses, if anybody's looking for a public course, we offer them in AgilePM, Scrum, Safe, Kanban, whatever you need, just check out the website. You can download today's website, today's slides, and all sorts of things really in the resources section. I do think that you would find particularly interesting if you've enjoyed today's webinar, Keith's latest white paper, which was about distributed teams, distributed Agile, so check that one out. And also there's a really nice download on there, Streetwise Moscow, that's free to download. So just have a look on that downloads page in the miscellaneous section. Connect with us on social media. We've got a DSDM group on LinkedIn, which is very popular. And you can also follow us on Twitter at AgileKRC. And like I said earlier, we do have a YouTube channel now as well. So just look for AgileKRC on YouTube. And you can watch all of these recordings from all of our previous webinars. I'm going to pass you back to Keith in a second so that you can take your questions. There are always more questions than we get time to answer. So Keith has very kindly started typing up all the questions that he doesn't get time to answer, and we post those on his blog. So again, just go to the website, agilekrc.com/blog, and you'll also be able to find the questions and answers from previous webinars as well. So hopefully you'll find that useful. So I'm going to pass you back to Keith now for the questions.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thanks for the questions. We've got some great questions coming. I'll try and get through as many as I possibly can. Okay, so we have, let me move my webcam over so it looks like I'm... Question number one then is, can we do Agile without a PM, without a project manager? I moved from an organisation with 20 PMs to an organisation with none, and that's from Petya. The short answer is yes, you can. But what you'll be doing will be straightforward BAU, business as usual, an established product, and you will be doing lots of small changes. If you're doing complicated work, then that needs to be managed by somebody. So it's either a project manager or you've renamed it to somebody like a product manager or chief banana. I don't mind what you name it as. So if you're doing something complicated, it needs to be managed, and that's called a project manager. Whether you rename that to something else or you're only doing straightforward operational product development stuff, then yes, you can do without a project manager. I've got a question, so that's a question from Petya. I've got a question from Avin, and it said, our dev team uses Scrum and will not develop without a detailed spec, data dictionaries, etc. Don't get me wrong, our BAs have to do some design and speccing, but what is the best way to wean them off the sorts of comfort that are detailed but out of date as soon as written spec provides? So, Avin, it does sound like you're pretty clued up on a few things there, and the advice I would give you is what I would call have enough and no more information. So sometimes you might need a detailed specification, and sometimes you might need a very lightweight index card. You might be able to do it using a whiteboard. So really you've got to go with enough information and no more. Is it safe to move on? And that's where I'm saying I'm not going to say yes or no to that. I would try to work out what information they need, whether you can give that information in a slightly easier digestible form, such as modeling or prototyping with them, or sitting there having a sort of a conversation, as opposed to, as I say, going after particular sort of documents. It is horses for courses. Sometimes you need quite a bit of documentation for your development team. Other times you don't. You're trying to replace documentation with good communication practices. So that's what you're trying to do with a lot of Agile. That's why communication is one of those golden rules. It's just a bit noisy out there, so you can shut that. Thanks. I've got something else going on for me which is distracting me. I've got something here from Marco. What do you recommend about tools to collaborate in a team with different locations? There's other webinars on that. You might want to look at that, distributed working. And the golden rule here is blend all those channels. There's a time to go for Skype. There's a time to go for flying out, going abroad. There's times for a phone call, but too much reliance on email can be very, very counterproductive and can be quite damaging. So in terms of tools, there's a lot out there, and the biggest piece of advice I would give you is work out what you're trying to do, then look at the tools that do that. Don't go and buy some collaboration tool set and see what it does. That's what a lot of people do. Big mistake in my opinion. You'd be amazed how much stuff you've got that will already do a lot of the work for you. Okay. My favourite question comes from Joe, and it says, what if a senior business rep says they are happy for a project to delay by a week in order to include a new feature for good business reasons? If you insist on sticking to deadlines for purest Agile reasons, aren't you cutting off your nose to spite your face? I think in terms of the question on its own, then maybe you are cutting your nose off to spite your face. But the problem is you might be in what I call some form of denial. I mean, how did you get into a situation where you've had to extend something? So you've used up a lot of your contingency already, because one assumes you factor contingency in, yet you're still having to extend. And the trouble with extending any project, there's two big problems with it. Number one, it sets a precedent, so we can extend any project if somebody wants a bit more. But the thing that people don't realise is what's called opportunity cost. There's a hidden damage, if you like, to other projects. Other projects are starting late on. A lot of the value and the benefit of a project are normally delivered in the upfront, the bigger sort of features, if you like. It's the 80-20 rule. So by just doing a little bit more and an extra feature and just one more wafer thin mint type argument, I think the application of that across an organisation is actually a very dangerous precedent to set. Now, would I say never, ever, ever under any circumstances? No, I wouldn't. But would I say that it's a very bad habit? It's it's a little bit like, as I say, the wafer thin mint scenario, or oh, just one more drink won't hurt. It's that sort of attitude that I think doesn't see it in a wider sort of totality. Joe, your question there is actually massive, and they'll probably take a whole webinar to get through. But my reason is the precedent it sets and the impact on other work and other projects, because projects don't exist in isolation. And if you want to look up some stuff on the internet, there's something called cost of delay, and it's the idea of everything shifting to the right, and you end up getting 4 projects done when you should have got 5 done. It's that kind of argument. What else have I got here? How do you deal with a supplier commercial contracts where fixed price sorry, the question is, how do you deal with supplier commercial contracts? Fixed price doesn't work. That's from Tony. It does work. There's no problem. You can have fixed priced Agile contracts. You just baseline your requirements at a slightly higher level, and you don't go into detail. A detailed fixed spec requirements document and a contract, yeah, that's not very Agile. That's called shooting yourself in the foot, and it's normally the customer that loses out there. Not always, because sometimes the supplier takes a bit of a punt and gets into a right mess. So yes, you can. Time and materials might be an easier model to use. There's a lot of work now on Agile contracts directly because of that question you're asking there, Tony. Joe's just said something really useful answer. Thanks there, Joe. Sometimes people go, you're talking nonsense, but that's what I see firsthand, to be honest. I've got something from Kim here. Kim is saying, I've been working as a Scrum Master in Agile environments for 5 years, mainly in the areas of web and mobile development. I've just moved into business intelligence, or BI, and I'm facilitating the transition to Agile. BI is inherently a waterfall process, and goes on to say a little bit more, and it says, do I have any experience of BI and how to apply Agile? I find BI, business intelligence, a very easy area for Agile. I find it a very rich environment, mainly because Agile very much fits with this sort of information thing. I'd rather have 80% of the information now rather than all the information later. Using Moscow prioritization you might find quite useful. Spend a lot of time, I was working with a customer on a BI thing only about 9 months ago, and they had about 100 reports. And we could prioritize the 100 reports, and inside the reports you could prioritize all the information on them, almost column by column. And what was amazing was how many of these reports were must-have, like, you know, drop dead if we don't get it information. And really surprisingly, the number was incredibly small. It was, I think if my memory serves me right, it was down below 20%. Now, don't get me wrong, with the Moscow system of must, should, and could, a lot of the information should be there because it would be useful, but the actual reality was the essential stuff was very, 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 very small. Therefore, you've got your wriggle room, and you can go off to your, these people were dealing with the senior board at a utility company, and they could go and say, you know, we're going to get your reports ready by this date. Pretty certain we'll get 30 of them done by this date, but it might be 28, might be 27. But that sort of scope variance really did lend itself very well to BI. Let me see, I've got time for one more. Sylvie says, what are the risks of self-organising teams? I think I'd probably repeat a lot of the things I said about self-organising on the original slide, and the simple point being that at what point does how we do the work suddenly move into something else where you decide what work we're going to do. That's a different thing. You need to give people a boundary. They get from A to B. You know, if you're asking them to build a garage, you know, let them sort out how it is. You don't want to find out they've just built a swimming pool because they preferred it. So a pretty naff analogy, but what I'm trying to say is organisation is different from direction. It actually goes at a different level. The delivery, if we're talking software in this particular case, software delivery is at the coalface. Above that is what I call project management, project governance, and that creates a boundary that makes it safe for people to you know, work at the coalface. Okay, I'm going to finish now, and I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody, for the questions, and we'll have a look at those that we didn't get done, and there are your 10 golden rules going up there. So I'm now going to finish. Just your final point I haven't told you yet, the quote was by Groove Armada. Now, I hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and remember it's going up onto YouTube. That should be done sometime today. And we really do value your feedback, so please send it in as much as you can. And if you're watching the World Cup, best of luck for your team and your country. Bye for now.